Under the harsh airport lights, a racist cop's violent act against a black soldier sparks an explosive battle for truth. One assault unravels a web of corruption, betrayal, and hidden alliances within the system. In a fight for justice, one man becomes the unlikely beacon of hope against overwhelming darkness. What happened next shocked everyone and set off a chain of events no one saw coming. Stay with me. This is a story you need to hear. Before we start the story, comment below and let us know where in the world you're watching from today. And if you find this story impactful, don't forget to subscribe for more. The airport terminal lay under a heavy gray sky, its fluorescent lights flickering in the distance as if echoing the uncertainty of the night. In this quiet space, every sound felt magnified. The soft hum of the ventilation, the distant murmur of hurried footsteps, and the barely audible whispers of anxious travelers. It was a place where stories converged and destinies collided. Officer Bradley strode down the polished floor, his posture rigid, and his eyes scanning every corner with an intensity that bordered on suspicion. His uniform, crisp and neat, seemed at odds with the turbulent thoughts swirling in his mind. There was an edge to his step, a mix of authority and barely concealed disdain that hinted at deep-seated prejudices. The night had already taken on a somber tone, and his presence only darkened it further. Across the terminal, Sergeant Marcus moved with a quiet confidence that came from years of discipline and honor. His eyes, calm yet alert, observed the bustling environment with a mix of hope and resignation. Marcus had seen much in his time, and his heart carried the weight of battles fought both abroad and within his own community. As he made his way to the check-in counter, every step was measured, each moment laden with the silent strength of a man who had endured and persevered. Their paths crossed near a row of waiting chairs, where the tension in the air seemed to tighten like a coiled spring. The muted murmur of conversation halted for a brief moment, as if the very walls of the terminal sensed the impending storm. In that charged silence, Officer Bradley's eyes locked onto Sergeant Marcus. A spark of animosity flashed, a remnant of a long-held bias that saw Marcus not as a fellow citizen or a hero, but as an outsider in a place where he should have been welcome. The atmosphere grew heavier still, and the space between the two men crackled with unspoken words. Marcus felt the chill of that gaze, a cold reminder of a prejudice that had shadowed him long before he arrived at the airport. He straightened his back, preparing for the confrontation he knew was inevitable. The background noise of rolling suitcases and distant announcements faded into insignificance as the two figures stood in the center of a silent battleground. In that moment, the airport was more than just a transit point. It was a stage set for a conflict that would expose the raw nerves of society. The night held its breath, and every heart in the terminal skipped a beat, sensing that the calm was merely the eye of a storm. Officer Bradley and Sergeant Marcus, two men bound by duty, yet divided by beliefs, faced each other under the indifferent glow of fluorescent lights. The world around them blurred, leaving only the stark contrast of light and shadow, hope and hatred. This was not just a meeting of two individuals, but a collision of ideologies, a moment that would forever change the narrative of a place where every arrival marked the beginning of a new story. Sergeant Marcus sat quietly by the window, his eyes fixed on the departure board that flickered with the names and destinations of countless lives. Every number and letter on that screen echoed the journey he was about to undertake, a journey meant to bring him closer to a place of acceptance, away from the constant reminders of his struggles. Marcus was a man of quiet dignity, hardened by years of service and softened by the losses he had endured. His determination to rise above the prejudice he faced was the silent engine that drove him forward. In his heart, he knew that his mission was not just to travel, but to stand as a testament to resilience and hope against the dark tides of discrimination. Across the terminal, Officer Bradley moved with a rigid precision that spoke volumes about his character. Bradley's stern gaze and clipped posture concealed a turbulent mix of insecurities and long-held biases. He had built his identity on the strict enforcement of rules, a belief system that, over time, had warped into a personal crusade against anyone he deemed unworthy. For Bradley, every deviation from his idea of order was an affront, and each new face in the crowd was a potential challenge to his authority. Deep down, his actions were fueled by a fear of losing control, a fear that was masked by his aggressive insistence on discipline. Their paths converged in the heart of the terminal, where the buzz of hurried footsteps and distant announcements faded into an almost eerie silence. Here, Marcus's quiet determination and Bradley's simmering hostility were drawn into a single, inevitable collision. Marcus's goal was simple yet profound: to move forward in his life, to prove that courage and decency could triumph over hatred. Every step he took was a small act of defiance against a world that had often been unkind to him. His past was filled with moments where his strength had been tested, and he had learned that true courage meant facing the shadows of injustice head-on. In stark contrast, Bradley saw in Marcus a symbol of everything he believed needed to be eradicated from his sphere of control. For Bradley, Marcus represented a threat to the order he so desperately clung to, a reminder that his worldview was under siege. This internal conflict was not just about a personal dislike, it was a clash of ideals. Marcus's calm resolve and gentle spirit stood as a direct challenge to Bradley's harsh, uncompromising approach to law enforcement. Their interaction was more than a fleeting encounter. It was a confrontation of conflicting worlds, one where deep-seated emotions and personal histories wove together into a tapestry of tension and impending turmoil. As the two men found themselves drawn into an orbit of charged silence, it became clear that their meeting was fated. The airport was no longer just a place of transit, but a battleground where the forces of hope and hatred prepared to collide. In that moment, both Marcus and Bradley were forced to face not only each other, but the larger, more painful truths about the society they inhabited. The calm of the terminal shattered in an instant. As twilight deepened, a murmur of tension rippled through the crowd, building into a palpable charge. Without warning, Officer Bradley stepped forward from the shadows near the check-in area, his eyes dark with a fury that went beyond mere duty. In a low, menacing tone, he muttered words laced with contempt, and then, in a flash of motion, his hand struck Sergeant Marcus squarely across the face. The impact echoed in the quiet space, a violent punctuation in an already strained atmosphere. Marcus's eyes widened in disbelief as he stumbled back, his hand instinctively rising to his bruised cheek. The assault was not just physical, it carried the weight of deep-rooted prejudice and an unyielding sense of superiority. Around them, the usual hum of the airport faded into a heavy silence, broken only by the sharp intake of breath from startled onlookers. In that split second, time seemed to slow. Every detail was etched in Marcus's mind: the startled expressions of those nearby, the crisp echo of Bradley's disdainful sneer, and the unmistakable clench of his own jaw as pain and resolve mingled. The violent act was a stark declaration, a reminder of the biases and injustices that had long shadowed Marcus's existence. It was an unprovoked challenge, thrusting him into a conflict he had hoped to avoid. As the crowd shifted uneasily, a few brave souls edged closer, while others recoiled in fear or disapproval. The terminal, once a place of transitory calm, now felt like an arena where the personal collided with the societal. In that moment, the true nature of the conflict began to reveal itself. Marcus, though shaken, felt a fire ignite within him, a blend of pain, anger, and an unwavering determination not to be diminished by this act of hatred. His spirit, forged through years of adversity and sacrifice, refused to be broken. Officer Bradley, still standing with a twisted sense of authority, seemed lost in the haze of his own bitterness. His assault was a desperate assertion of control, a futile attempt to enforce a divisive order that was rapidly unraveling. As murmurs grew into a chorus of dissent, even within the sterile confines of the airport, it became clear that his actions had sparked more than just immediate outrage. They had lit a fuse for a larger, more profound reckoning. In that charged silence following the attack, subtle signs of an impending storm began to emerge. The shocked faces of bystanders, the determined set in Marcus's eyes, and the palpable shift in the room hinted at a broader conflict waiting just beyond the terminal's walls. This moment was the catalyst that would propel Marcus into a battle far greater than a single act of violence. It was a turning point that promised to expose the deep-seated fractures in society and set the stage for a struggle between hate and the enduring strength of the human spirit. And so, with the echoes of that fateful blow lingering in the air, the stage was set for a turbulent journey, a journey where every step forward would be a defiant stand against the forces of injustice and intolerance. Marcus stood rooted to the spot as the echoes of Bradley's blow still reverberated in the cavernous terminal. The incident was more than a personal attack. It symbolized an injustice that had haunted him for years. As he steadied himself against a nearby column, he realized that his journey toward dignity was now obstructed by deeper, more systemic challenges. The path he had set for himself, once clear and determined, now twisted with uncertainties. In the midst of the shocked silence, a soft yet firm voice broke through. Detective Alicia, known for her unbiased resolve and keen insight, stepped forward. Her eyes, steady and compassionate, swept over the gathering crowd. "I need to speak with everyone who witnessed this," she said calmly, her tone leaving no room for hesitation. As she began her inquiries, Marcus sensed that her involvement might either be a beacon of hope or the beginning of a complicated maze he had no desire to navigate. A few moments later, Corporal James hurried over, concern etched on his face. "Marcus, we must tread carefully," he whispered. "This isn't just about you and Bradley anymore. It's about what's hidden beneath all of this." James's words carried an ominous weight, hinting at unseen forces and internal pressures within their own ranks. Marcus's heart pounded, not just from the sting of the assault, but from the realization that his fight for respect was now entangled with larger issues he had hoped to avoid. Amid the unfolding chaos, another unsettling detail emerged. The security cameras that should have captured the entire confrontation were missing crucial footage. In the glare of the terminal lights, this gap in evidence loomed like a dark cloud. Marcus's recollections, vivid yet burdened by shock, were now his only defense against a cover-up that seemed all too possible. The missing footage was not a trivial oversight. It was a glaring obstacle that threatened to undermine the truth of what had occurred. As whispers and speculative glances passed among the bystanders, Marcus felt an overwhelming sense of isolation. Every attempt to recall the precise sequence of events was met with skepticism from those who preferred silence over truth. The weight of this uncertainty pressed down on him, making him question whether his quest for justice would ever be realized or merely lost in bureaucratic indifference. In that charged atmosphere, the stakes of his journey grew dramatically higher. His goal of moving forward with dignity was suddenly challenged by a confluence of personal and institutional betrayal. The very system that was meant to protect and serve was now showing signs of deep fractures. Marcus recognized that this moment marked a turning point, where the struggle was no longer solely about a personal affront, but a larger battle against a pervasive injustice. Every face in the terminal reflected a mixture of fear, anger, and resignation. As Marcus looked into the crowd, he saw not just witnesses, but potential allies and adversaries in a fight that was about to escalate beyond the confines of the airport. The incident, once a singular act of violence, had ignited a spark that promised to expose the hidden rot within the institution and challenge the status quo in ways Marcus had never imagined. The fluorescent lights in the terminal flickered like anxious hearts as the chaos began to settle. Marcus stood in the center of the aftermath, his senses overwhelmed by the raw tension that now filled every corner of the space. The once mundane sounds of rolling suitcases and distant announcements were replaced by murmurs of disbelief and the rustle of shuffling feet. Every shadow cast on the polished floor seemed to whisper secrets of betrayal and hidden alliances. In that charged silence, Detective Alicia reappeared, her calm determination a stark contrast to the palpable fear. With measured steps, she gathered witnesses and examined every detail of the incident. "Marcus," she said quietly, leaning closer as if to share a secret meant only for his ears, "there's more to this than a single act of violence." Her eyes, piercing and earnest, met his, and in that moment, Marcus sensed that his battle was shifting from a personal wound to a much larger conflict. Alicia revealed that a grainy video, recorded by an observant traveler, had captured not only Bradley's brutal assault, but also a heated exchange between Bradley and a senior officer moments before the attack. This unexpected revelation hinted at a conspiracy within the ranks, a secret meeting, a planned provocation, or perhaps an unspoken pact to cover up what was about to unfold. The missing security footage was now just one piece of a puzzle that was growing more complex by the minute. Across the terminal, Corporal James's expression changed as he watched the unfolding events. His earlier look of concern had deepened into one of guilt and fear. In the half-light, his eyes darted nervously, betraying an internal struggle. Marcus felt the sting of betrayal as he realized that trusted colleagues might be complicit in a system that protected prejudice over truth. The overhead lights seemed to emphasize every anxious twitch and furtive glance, transforming the terminal into a stage where every detail was a clue. As the revelation sank in, Marcus's inner resolve hardened. His mission, to seek justice and reclaim his dignity, took on new urgency. The terminal was no longer just a passageway for travelers. It had become a crucible where personal and systemic conflicts would be exposed. Every whispered conversation, every nervous shift in posture among the onlookers served as a reminder that the battle was far from over. In a quiet corner, a lone traveler stepped forward, clutching a small digital recorder. This simple act of courage symbolized a spark of hope amid the encroaching darkness. With trembling hands, the traveler handed the recorder over to Detective Alicia, affirming that even in a system riddled with corruption, truth could be salvaged from the shadows. This pivotal moment marked the midpoint of Marcus's journey, a turning point where personal pain merged with the larger fight against an unjust system. With each passing second, the stakes grew higher, and the sense of unity among those seeking justice strengthened. The terminal, awash with the flicker of fluorescent lights and the murmurs of a restless crowd, had transformed into a battleground of hidden truths, where every revealed secret was a step toward redemption and the promise of a more just future. Marcus felt the weight of every whispered word and sidelong glance as he navigated the now tense terminal. The aftermath of Bradley's assault had not faded. Instead, it had deepened into a mounting struggle that threatened to shatter the fragile hope Marcus had nurtured. As he moved away from the central area where chaos had erupted, every step was burdened by uncertainty and the fear that the truth might be lost in the tide of corruption. Just when he believed that the support of Detective Alicia and the cautious empathy of Corporal James would carry him through, an unexpected twist shifted everything. In a quiet moment near a dimly lit corridor, a stranger in a worn jacket pressed a sealed envelope into his hand. The envelope bore an insignia Marcus recognized from a covert operation during his service, a symbol he had thought was long buried in his past. With trembling fingers, he broke the seal and unfolded a series of documents and grainy photographs. What he discovered sent a jolt through his system. The papers detailed a secret network within the law enforcement ranks, a network not only enabling Bradley's aggressive behavior, but actively suppressing evidence of similar incidents across the board. The documents implicated a high-ranking official, someone Marcus had once looked up to as a beacon of integrity, revealing that this trusted figure was deeply involved in orchestrating a cover-up of racial abuse. The betrayal was sudden and brutal, ripping away the last vestiges of Marcus's trust in the system he had devoted his life to. His personal battle against prejudice had now transformed into a fight against an entrenched corruption that threatened to crush the very ideals he held dear. As the gravity of this revelation sank in, murmurs began to ripple through the gathered crowd. Faces that had been previously indifferent now shifted with new anxiety, and the atmosphere in the terminal grew heavier with unspoken tension. The documents were more than evidence. They were a call to arms exposing a systemic rot that reached deep into the heart of the institution. The unexpected twist changed the trajectory of Marcus's journey. No longer was his struggle merely a personal quest for dignity. It had become a mission to unmask a vast conspiracy that undermined justice and equality. Marcus's resolve hardened as he stood in the flickering light. The weight of responsibility was immense, yet the newfound evidence ignited a fierce determination. Each detail in the documents reinforced his belief that the truth must come out, no matter the cost. The terminal, once just a transient space for weary travelers, now symbolized the battlefield where courage would confront corruption head-on. Taking a deep breath, Marcus realized that every challenge he faced was a piece of a larger puzzle, a puzzle that, once solved, could expose the deeply buried injustices of the system. With the documents clutched tightly in his hand, he set his gaze forward, prepared to confront the corruption that had stolen his peace and dignity. The path ahead was uncertain and fraught with danger, but Marcus knew that the truth was his only ally. Determined to fight for justice and to shine a light into the darkest corners of power, he stepped forward, ready for the battle that would redefine everything he believed in. Under the harsh glare of the terminal's fluorescent lights, the air felt charged with a power that no one could ignore. Marcus stood at the center of it all, his heart pounding as if it wanted to break free from his chest. Every step he had taken, every hardship he had endured, had led him to this decisive moment. In his hand, he clutched the documents that exposed the hidden rot within the system, proof of a corruption so deep that it threatened to swallow the truth whole. Around him, the crowd of shocked onlookers formed a silent ring, their eyes wide and voices hushed in anticipation of what was to come. Officer Bradley, once so sure of his authority, now found himself isolated in a corner of the terminal. The mask of arrogance had finally slipped, replaced by a raw, trembling fear. His presence was a stark reminder of the injustice that had set off this chain of events. With every flicker of the lights above, his shadow danced erratically on the polished floor, a visual echo of the instability within him. Marcus took a deep breath, feeling the weight of his mission settle upon his shoulders. His voice, though strained from pain, rang clear and resolute. "I stand here not just for myself, but for every voice silenced by fear," he declared. His words cut through the thick silence like a knife, resonating with everyone present. It was a plea for justice, a cry against the prejudice and corruption that had plagued their lives for far too long. Detective Alicia moved swiftly among the witnesses, her calm presence anchoring the chaos. She gathered those who had seen the events unfold, urging them to share their truths, to stand together against the tide of injustice. Corporal James, torn between his duty and his conscience, watched the unfolding scene with haunted eyes. His conflicted loyalty was evident, yet in that moment, even he could not deny the righteousness of Marcus's cause. High-ranking officials, drawn by the commotion, arrived with stern faces and determined steps. They could no longer ignore the mounting evidence or the voices rising in unison against the corrupt order. The terminal, once a mere passageway for travelers, had transformed into a battleground where decades of hidden bias and unchecked power were finally being challenged. Every whispered conversation, every nervous glance, contributed to an atmosphere thick with expectancy and raw emotion. In that instant, the stakes had never been higher. The system's oppressive grip, which had long stifled the hope of many, was beginning to crumble under the weight of truth and unity. Marcus's eyes shone with fierce determination as he continued, "Today, we reclaim our dignity and we light a fire that no darkness can extinguish." His declaration was met with a growing murmur of agreement, as if the very walls of the terminal echoed his sentiment. Under the piercing light, the collision between hope and hate reached its climax. In this moment of high tension, every soul present felt the surge of change, a promise that the battle for justice was only just beginning, and that truth, at long last, would prevail. The terminal had quieted as the initial storm of chaos began to subside, leaving behind a space filled with heavy contemplation and tentative hope. In the days that followed, the evidence Marcus had unearthed sparked an internal reckoning within the institution. The documents, once hidden away in a forgotten envelope, were now the center of a fierce inquiry. A task force was set up to dig into the corruption that had tainted the system, and Officer Bradley found himself isolated, his authority crumbling under the weight of undeniable proof. Marcus, still nursing the physical and emotional bruises from that fateful day, gradually emerged as a reluctant beacon for change. Though he carried scars that would not soon fade, his resolve had deepened into a quiet strength. With the support of Detective Alicia and even Corporal James, whose conflicted loyalty had shifted as he witnessed the truth, Marcus began to see that his struggle was not only about personal vindication, but also about challenging a long-entrenched injustice. His journey was slowly transforming from a single act of resistance into a movement for transparency and accountability. In a small conference room within the station, high-ranking officials sat with furrowed brows as they reviewed the mounting evidence. The revelation that Bradley had not acted alone but was part of a larger network of complicity forced an uncomfortable confrontation with the institution's legacy. For many, this meant acknowledging painful truths about their own past decisions and the systems they had once blindly trusted. While some demanded swift retribution, others hesitated, torn between duty and conscience. It was a moment of collective introspection where the clarity of Marcus's courage cast a long shadow over the long-standing culture of silence. As Bradley was formally dismissed from duty, his departure was met with a mixture of relief and lingering sorrow among his colleagues. For Marcus, the resolution was bittersweet. The dismantling of a corrupt regime did not erase the wounds inflicted that day, nor did it magically mend the fractured community. Yet it did pave the way for a more honest dialogue about race, accountability, and the price of injustice. The terminal, once the scene of raw hostility, had become a quiet symbol of transformation, a place where painful truths led to meaningful change. In the final days of the investigation, Marcus found himself walking slowly along the now familiar corridors of the airport, reflecting on the turbulent journey that had brought him here. The conversations he overheard hinted at a future where such incidents might be prevented, where voices like his could affect real change. But there was also an undercurrent of uncertainty. The scars of injustice ran deep, and true healing was a slow, arduous process. Marcus's story did not end with a triumphant victory in a court of public opinion. Rather, it closed on a note of solemn reflection, inviting all who listened to consider the cost of standing up for what is right. The transformation of the system was only just beginning, and while hope had been restored in part, the echoes of the past would continue to challenge every step toward a more just future. If you found this story powerful, make sure to hit that like button, share your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more videos like this. Your support helps us bring more important stories to light.